solemnly swear or affirm testimony about giving this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may have a seat. And if you please state your full name and then spell it for the record.
It's Dean O'Kelly, and it's DEAN O''K-E-L-L-E-Y.
Thank you, Mr. O'Kelly. You may proceed, Mr. DeJognette.
Thank you.
Sir, how are you currently employed?
I'm a deputy marshal in district court with Judge Erica Mendoza.
Prior to become a deputy marshal, well, I guess you've had multiple hats. At some point, were you a Metro police officer?
Yes, I was for 20 plus years.
And approximately what year did you start?
September of 1991.
And when did you retire as a Metro officer?
July 12th of 2012.
And after July 12th of 2012, did you do something else with Metro?
I did for about almost 8.5 years. I was a cold case homicide investigator.
Now, well, let me ask you this. When did you first go to homicide?
In 2003, on July.
So on September 7th of 1996, what was your assignment?
I was a detective in the gang unit on one of the enforcement teams.
What does that mean you did for Metro? What's an enforcement team?
So the enforcement teams are dressed in greens, and we usually have 5 or 6 detectives together, and we would patrol known gang areas and come in contact with gatherings that involved gang members. And then after enforcement, I did 2 years of investigation where I investigated gang-related crimes.
Before I get to your actions on this particular evening, I want to ask you a little bit about how the process of report writing has changed at Metro over the years. You have handled your own cases since the early 2000s, but you also were a cold case investigator, which I assume that means you also have experience with years and years and years before you ever even became a police officer.
Certainly.
Was there a particular way that cases were documented up until the early to mid 2000s?
I mean, I think there's been some changes over time just because of the digital age. And, when I first went to homicide, we were still using typewriters that had the little spinning ball on there and actually typing in triplicate, those types of things. Keeping our notes, handwritten in our notebook. And then it kind of changed over time. Everything went digital, and we started keeping things on the computer.
And so when we're talking 96, there was multiple reports written by officers as they did things because there wasn't the same computerized systems we have today.
That's correct.
Modern day, is there something called a main case report or a main officer's report related to homicides?
Yes, there is.
Explain that to ladies and gentlemen.
So what we normally do, and it kind of depends on the detective themselves. I mean, you probably worked with people that have Post-its all over their desk, and it's a total wreck, and you have no idea what you're looking at, but they know where everything is, and they know how it's organized. We had detectives that were like that. Me personally, I would keep everything on what's called a case management form. So from the very beginning, from the very start of when we got a call, and we're keeping notes in a notebook, all that information go into a case management form. So I wouldn't be initially concerned with an officer's report getting started at any point because I was using that management form each and every time we did something investigatively. If we took a phone call from, a witness, then I would document that on that form. And at some point, especially if you had somebody that was in custody, you would transfer all that information over into an organized officer's report, which would then have the title at the top. It would have the date and time and location of when the incident occurred, who's involved, who are the suspects, who are the victims, who are the witnesses, and it would be in a chronological order in an investigation. But initially, everything's kept just basically in the management form. Eventually, you want to get to the point where you put together all that information into an officer's report, And there will come a point in time where the individual detective would make the decision that the officer's report's final, right? You would get it signed off. It'd be signed off by your sergeant. It'd go into the case file. And then from that point, you would just basically be filing addendums as new information came in. You might write that information down on that management form and then do an additional officer's report. That's definitely something that I saw when I went to cold case. Some of the cases that were, 20 years old, every single step that detective did was a completely separate officer's report. So you'd get 15 officers' report in the case file. It definitely made a lot more sense to finally get to one point where we had just one officer's report covering the case.
And in your experience, is it unusual for an officer's report to be the very last thing that's generated by the detective assigned to the particular case?
No, that's not unusual at all.
I want to direct your attention back to September of 1997, and I'm going to put up really two aerials for you first of all, but I'm going to start with State's Exhibit number 1. Can we go back to me? That appears to be an aerial of Las Vegas Valley.
Yes.
And it's clearly more modern than 1996 because you can see T-Mobile over here and some other things. Is that correct?
Quite a bit different today. Yes, that's true.
And then I'm going to go back and show State's Exhibit number 2. This is a much earlier rendition of the Las Vegas Valley because T-Mobile's not there. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And identified on State's Exhibit number 2 is where the I can't move. Oh, I can move the mouse away. Where it says Monte Carlo, that's generally where the Park MGM is today.
That's correct.
And at the time, back in 1996, there was a club called the 662 Club on Flamingo. Is that correct?
Yes, very familiar with it.
And is that referenced in State's Exhibit number 2 as well?
It is.
And is that generally in the location where it's at?
Correct.
So now I want to jump back to 1. At about 11:17 p.m. On September 7th of 1996, where were you?
We were conducting enforcement activity kind of northeast of the location of Koval and Flamingo.
And did something catch your attention?
Yes. As we were out with a couple of 2-3 gang members, we heard over the radio an officer rather excited, certainly under a stressful situation, reporting shots being fired and requesting a code red on the radio. We weren't very far away, so we cut the guys loose that we were with, got in our vehicles, and with lights and siren, we went over to respond to that area of the Maxim Hotel.
When an officer calls out code red, what does that mean? What is he trying to do?
The code red is so that no other radio traffic is coming across except for what those officers are going through. So it's trying to keep the radio traffic to a minimum. So we didn't even announce that we were en route. That's not important for dispatch or really anybody else to know that we were on our way, because we're waiting for updates from that officer or from the officers involved. So we stay off the radio. It's a sacred thing. You don't break the code red unless you really have to get on the radio.
And where do you respond to?
We responded to the intersection of Koval and Flamingo right there at the Maxim Hotel. Now it's called the Westin. But we went into the parking lot on the south side of the Maxim, and where we saw a patrol unit.
At some point, do you walk out onto Flamingo? Well, let me ask you this. When you first arrive, is there traffic still driving eastbound on Flamingo?
Yes, I mean, nothing nothing's changed so far as traffic at that point, because whatever had happened was several minutes before that. So now people are still just driving by. We got to the parking lot. My Sergeant Cindy West, had inquired as to where the shots had come from, and we were able to look out into the street there on Flamingo, just west of Koval, and I saw in the headlights just little glints of light and recognized that. I spent plenty of time on a firing range, and I know what brass looks like on the ground. So we were able to determine where several cartridge cases were located in the street west of Koval on Flamingo.
I'm going to approach and show you State's proposed exhibit 34 to 41. As you look through those, I'm going to grab something from the clerk. Do you recognize those?
I did.
And how do you recognize those?
When we spotted the cartridge cases in the street, at the time my enforcement vehicle was in a Chevy van, and we had a whole bunch of cones. So as we located the cartridge cases there in the roadway, we took a bunch of cones out of my vehicle and actually placed them, in the photographs you'll see it a little bit different, but we placed the cones on top of or over the cartridge cases, so the cones protected where they were located. Because you could even see there was at least, I know one for sure, maybe more, that had already been run over by traffic, so it was a little bit mangled. So we protected the crime scene, and we also popped a couple of flares on the north side of the number 3 travel lane where the cartridge cases are located.
And this State's exhibits 34 through 41 fairly and accurately represent that situation.
Yes, it is.
Move to admit.
No objection, Your Honor.
So admitted.
So I'm going to put up 34. And can you just describe for us what we're looking at?
So you can see the cartridge cases are kind of straddling the 2 lanes.
I'll stop you for a second, Mr. O'Kelly.
Yes.
There's a mouse sitting right there. Don't click it. Just it'll freeze up the whole system, but you can use it as a pointer.
Exactly. So these 2 cones that we set up here were more or less to protect where the cartridge cases were located. These other cones are covering the actual cartridge cases in the roadway. The one that's closest to us in this picture is a bullet fragment. It was the furthest away from Koval. And then the other cones are all spent cartridge cases, Winchester, Smith & Wesson 40 caliber cartridge cases.
Do you know a person by the name of Dan Ford?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Dan?
Dan Ford is a senior crime scene analyst that I worked with quite a bit. We started on the department right around the same time. And ran into him several times on cases that I worked with in the gang unit investigations. We also utilized him on the RICO task force that I was on for a couple of years. And then he responded to countless homicide investigations during my career.
Eventually, does Mr. Ford leave the crime scene that was at Harmon and Las Vegas Boulevard and come, and is he the person that takes these pictures and winds up collecting these items?
Yes, he is. Fortunately, Dan was already dispatched to the area of the Maxim for the patrol units that had called out on the radio the shots that were fired. They were taking a report for damaged vehicles that were there, and Dan had already been dispatched to that. So he wasn't far away when the shots rang out, and he was requested to come to that scene.
Sitting there in front of you is State's proposed exhibit 129. Looking at State's proposed exhibit number 129, do you recognize what that item is?
Yes, I do. I've seen and reviewed the handwritten evidence inventory that was authored by Dan Ford. I can see that that's his handwriting. It's also his initials and P number that are on the package for the Winchester cartridge cases.
And then there's a red seal on the back of here. That would have been placed on by Mr. Ford, correct?
The red seal is not, so it is marked up here at the top for his P number. This doesn't look, I don't know, oh, that he wrote the date on that. So 9/7 of 96. So he initialed it in the top corner and then put the date down in the bottom corner, yes.
And all these blue seals are the times that the forensic lab has opened this package in order to look at these items and potentially do some testing.
That's correct. But I do remember from the evidence inventory that that Dan had indicated that these cartridge cases were checked for fingerprints at the time with negative results.
So I'm going to have, well, I guess I'll move to admit 129, Judge.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so admitted.
And I'm going to have you cut this not along a seal if there's a place left to
Is
do
there a
it.
place?
I think if we cut right along there, we can pull those items out.
Oh, yeah, down here at the bottom I can. I don't think we have to go too far. Let's do that.
And we just pull those items out. These, well, they will eventually be marked 129 G, well, A through G, but I'm going to show you this one, which has a 14 on the top of it. And you said you remember at least one of them was mangled.
Mm-hmm. This one's flattened on the opening opposite of the head stamp. It's flattened, so it's been run over.
And there appears to be at least one more of these that has some damage to it. Several of them have damage to them.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
They're definitely misshapen. A couple of them are. This is actually the closest that I've seen them, because when we came out, we just put the cones right over the top of them, didn't mess with them at all. So I'm able to now look at even the primary impacts, which is significant.
Why is that significant?
Because a Glock pistol has a rectangular opening for the firing pin. It's vertically oriented on the front of the bolt face for a Glock pistol, and you can tell by looking at the primer impact that that's roughly the shape of the impact on the primer.
So that suggests to you that the weapon was a Glock 40.
That's correct.
Now, Detective, or I guess it's Mr. O'Kelly now.
Detective retired. I don't know. Deputy Marshal.
Yeah, Deputy Marshal, there you go. While you're at the scene, are you getting updates on the radio as to potential suspect vehicles that you should be looking for?
Periodically, again, that code red is in effect for quite a while, so there's not a lot of radio traffic that was going on. The call came in initiating the code red at 11:17. We were short distance away, and we went code. Well, we ran code, so we did lights and siren. It didn't take us very long to get there. I know that Sergeant West waited until there was a complete lull in the radio traffic and announced that we were en route and arrived at the same time, and I believe that was at 11:26. We had been there before that, so we were there before 11:20. We were already there at the scene. So at about a little bit past 11:30, we got an update on the rough description of a light-colored Cadillac. I know at some point on the CAD report it said late 90s. It had to be late 80s, right? This is 96. And there was also some indication that it was in good condition, which would say that it was an older vehicle than late 90s, right? So we were looking for a light-colored, possibly white Cadillac with two black male occupants. And there was a report that it was northbound on Audrey, which now Audrey Lane is the Link, right? It's the Link lane. So it's on the west side of the Maxim going north. There was some report that possibly that's where the suspect vehicle had gone.
So initial reports is light color Cadillac, last seen northbound on Audrey.
Right, with two black males at that point.
Do you wind up getting updates throughout the evening as to the vehicle you're looking for?
We did. I'd say it was about an hour or so, about 1:45 maybe, right around that time, that we got an update that we were looking for that same white Cadillac in good condition, but potentially occupied now by 4 black males, and was southbound on Koval. That later made a little bit more sense to us, especially that we were out on the eastbound lanes of Koval, right just short of the intersection, and that the Cadillac had to have been to the south of the BMW, and it made more sense that they would have made a right turn. So that definitely clicked when we were told they were southbound on Koval.
Does there come a point in time when you do what's known as an ATL or attempt to locate that particular vehicle?
Yes. Thankfully, because Dan Ford was not too far away, we were able to get relieved from our protection of the crime scene where the cartridge cases were located. And it was, I think we cleared exactly an hour after the initial code red was called. And that was the first thing that we did was we went south on Koval, we checked areas that we frequented in the gang unit looking for potentially really any light colored Cadillac. I mean, the kind of the yellowish lights that we have in town, the street lights that they use for low, so it's not too much light in town. Those can kind of throw you off on color. So we were looking for any light colored Cadillac.
We'll put back up, says Exhibit 1. During all this time period that you and your partner ATL'd for this white Cadillac, did you ever drive into the parking lot of the carriage house?
No, I can say that in my 35 years, I've never been in the carriage house.
Thank you. I pass the witness.
Okay, cross-examination, Mr. Sims.
Sorry, sir, what's your last name again?
O'Kelly, O''K-E-L-L-E-Y.
Mr. O'Kelly, thank you for being here today. Your testimony, obviously, I would imagine before you were here, you probably reviewed your reports, whatever it is you wrote during that time period.
I didn't write any.
Okay.
Certainly, even after I went to homicide, I wasn't involved in the investigation for this case. I did review the CAD report, the computer-aided dispatch report, noting those times. I don't have that great a memory, so I'm going to have to tell you that. And that handwritten evidence inventory by Dan Ford. I have both copies right here in my notebook.
I see. So at the time you retired as a homicide detective?
I did.
And then at that point, you came back to work as in the cold case unit as an investigator.
I did, yes.
All right. Now, a couple things. First of all, when you retired as a detective with homicide, were there any outstanding reports that you had not drafted when you left?
I can tell you that and people love me, so they got a limousine and we had a big party. So as there was a limousine out in front of headquarters at 400 Martin Luther King, I was typing the last officer's report that I needed to personally finish. I was leaving a partner behind whose name is also Dean, so he was able to tie up any of the cases that we had at that point. But I would say there were, but the ones that I knew I needed to get done before I left, I got done.
And the reason why you prioritize those ones is because I would imagine they're still open investigations and you're handing it off to the next person to continue with your work.
That's correct. It makes it easier for them if it's tied up as best we can.
Right. Did you take any of your any of those cases with you when you went over to the cold case unit?
When I came back to cold case, that was the original reason that I even agreed to do cold case homicide investigation was because of unsolved cases that I personally had investigated, one in particular. So as soon as I came back to cold case homicide, the very first thing I did was go and pull Jamie Sheldon's case and bring it over to my desk. That's the first case that went there. And we were able to work, I was honored to be able to work on cases like that and others that I had been a part of when I was a detective, yes.
So in terms of, just explain to the jury what a cold case is. Can you explain that?
Certainly. So a cold case is officially cold when the detectives who are originally assigned to it are no longer there, whether they transferred out or they retired. If there isn't an original detective assigned to the case, it's considered cold, right? No one's assigned to it. Those cases can be handed off to other detectives that are still in the unit. I remember, when Marty Wildman left the department, he came over to me personally and said, hey, I'm handing Teresa Insana to you. Can you take this case on and continue to follow it up? It's considered cold because he's gone, right? As soon as he left, it's officially a cold case. But if there's a detective who was originally assigned to the case, it's their case until they're done, right? You're not going to go stepping on toes and just pulling cases and start working on other people's stuff unless they asked you to do it.
And with regards to the cold case unit, I'm assuming there's probably two detectives who are the official detectives for the unit, and then you have investigators, retired homicide detectives that help with the investigation?
That's correct. Initially when Sergeant Hefner, sergeant in homicide, but then came back with me at the same time. So the two of us came back and we were on our own. Like we had a sergeant that was assigned to us, but basically they were a signature block. We could pull any case that we wanted and work on those. The department saw, thankfully, a lot to do with the work that we were getting accomplished, where we solved 20, 25-year-old cases, and the department's able to go to the media and say, look, we're not giving up after all these years. We're going to continue to follow these cases and solve them. Because of that success level, then the department dedicated 2 full-time detectives that were still in homicide to the cold case unit. And then we had, I want to say 3, 4 more cold case investigators that were assigned to us. So I think we had a total of 5 or 6 at one point, plus the 2 detectives and a dedicated sergeant to the cold case unit.
So in terms of your work in the cold case as an investigator, you're not a detective, right?
No.
So there is a difference in terms of your responsibilities versus the responsibilities of a detective.
Correct.
Because the detective would be the law enforcement officer. Certainly. And you are a person helping the law enforcement officer.
Essentially, I mean, we can still steer the investigation where we want it to go. We're doing interviews, we're doing those things, but say authoring a search warrant. So if we run into a situation where we need a search warrant done, it's going to be, it may get written by one of us, but it's going to be sworn to as an affidavit by a detective on the department who's a sworn police officer.
Have you ever drafted a report, 8 years after you started an investigation?
Well, because of cold case, yes, certainly.
But yeah. Just as a police officer or a detective, have you ever waited, say, years to draft an actual report on something?
I don't know what would be my record-breaking delay in authoring a report, but I'd say, if you're dealing with a case where there's nobody in custody, like you haven't arrested anybody, probably pushing 2 years before I finally said, and even reluctantly said, all right, I'm gonna close this officer's report. It's signed off because we've run out of investigative leads. We're to that point. There's really nothing else coming in, and now that's officially done. Then there could be maybe somebody calling up, or we could have somebody that gets in a jam, right, where they're now looking at serious time. This has happened to us in cold case, where now that person says, hey, I have information on a murder. So now it's completely open. Now the case is back up and running, and there would be a new officer's report started at that point in time to complete that investigation. I know where the gun is, I know who did the shooting, and now we've got a solved case after 15, 20 years.
Now, have you ever delayed writing an officer's report after going to the grand jury and presenting evidence on that same case?
Yeah, I would say that I've gone to grand jury before officer's reports are done. I would say that I've gone to grand jury before I've started an officer's report. Again, because for me personally, and for a lot of the guys that I work with, I'm not completely OCD, but I mean, certainly there's things that I need to get done, or I'm not going to be able to sleep, that kind of thing. You may feel that way. But I always get the case management form started and maintained up to date. It's going to be up to date. If you make a phone call to me, I'm going to document it, date, time, phone call, right? That may not go into the ultimate officer's report because it's superfluous information, didn't mean anything, but I'm going to keep that record in the CMF. I might not even start the officer's report for months, and grand jury may have already happened. Now, I feel now some pressure to get that done, right? Because if I'm going to grand jury, more than likely we have somebody in custody, and I want the district attorney's office to have the benefit of a completed officer's report, although it's not necessary.
Right. And so if you had submitted it to the grand jury or done your grand jury, you're telling us at some point you could delay finalizing your officer's report.
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you delay that officer's report until after you retire?
Well, because I still have a partner that hasn't retired, I can have confidence in doing that. You know, we definitely did have that happen. I recall specifically a double murder that was not, the officer's report wasn't done when I left, because I knew Dean was going to be, Detective Rates was going to be continuing on with it.
Right, so you knew that the other detective would still be the detective handling the case through because you are now retired.
No question.
But what if you didn't have that detective there, that you're a partner? Would you have delayed after you retired to draft your officer's report?
I would not.
How about?
I wouldn't be able to do it, right? I mean, I just know that I wouldn't be able to do it. That's why when, the limo's out in front of headquarters, I'm typing an officer's report. I literally I got the officer's report done and then went downstairs. I was done. I was retired.
Now, can you explain to us? I'm sorry,
No.
for interrupting, but can you explain for us a little bit about why reports are so important to you in your line of work as a homicide detective?
Reports document everything, right? I mean, you need to document your observations. You need to document evidence. And for us, in homicide, and even in the gang unit before that, we did that with officers' reports. Officers' reports don't become evidence, right? Officers' reports are so anybody picking up that case file can walk through the investigation from beginning to the last part of an officer's report is conclusion, right? So it may be a conclusion as to what you believe happened and you don't have somebody in custody. It can be a completed officer's report where the case isn't solved. It's still open, right? But it's at that point when you're doing the conclusion, it's more or less your opinion. This is what we believe based on everything else that precedes it in the officer's report.
Okay. And that would, of course, help you later if you ever were called to testify in front of a jury to recall what happened.
Oh, absolutely. That's the go-to document for somebody who's preparing for trial is that officer's report. I mean, it can be lengthy. I've written officer's reports that are 70 pages long.
And with regard to those reports and being 70 pages long, fair to say that details are super important when you're doing this kind of investigation.
They are.
And that would be helpful for you to remember details in the future, right, to write a good report.
Right, the more extensive and the more detailed your report, the better off you're going to be, the more prepared you're going to be. But in addition to that, you could be documenting things that you observed or that you knew at the time you were doing the investigation that you don't realize were important, right? So I could document something in a crime scene that seems like it's innocuous, something that's just doesn't seem like it's that important. And then later on, when maybe a suspect's in custody or, the investigation's further, then you find out, oh, that one item that you made a note of now becomes important because the suspect touched it, or that was the murder weapon that was cleaned up and stuck over there and nobody realized it.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit here. So you're no longer a detective. You're now working with a cold case. Have you taken on any cold cases that weren't yours to begin with?
Certainly.
And what is typically the standard operating procedure when you are starting your investigation as a cold case investigator?
So you're pulling the case file, right? And it can be extensive, depending on the murder, depending on the case that you're looking at, can be rather extensive. Some of the cases that we were pulling had pouches in them with VHS tapes, right? There were separate boxes that had VHS tapes in them. We probably may even know what a VHS tape. So, and we had cassette tapes, right? Actual physical cassette tapes. So we had to maintain a VHS player in homicide to be able to review those things. So we had some of the archaic methods to review evidence. We would go through the entire case file, and that would give us a starting point. As you might imagine, what we're looking for in cold case, because of the advances in technology, is do we have any trace evidence that wasn't analyzed? Do we have any fingerprints that weren't analyzed? Do we have any DNA that maybe, this precedes DNA? We looked at some cases that were before I was born. Okay, it's my 65th lap around the sun. We were looking at cases before I was even on this planet. So you go through the entire thing and you try and make as heads or tails of where the detective took that investigation to that point. Sometimes that could be difficult, especially if you're dealing with one of those Post-it people, right? You're dealing with one of the ones that were writing notes on cocktail napkins and stuff and keeping them in the case file. We'd pull little notes that were like, I have no clue how this relates to the investigation at all. Don't know if they talked to this person, didn't talk to this person. Was this a witness? Was this a secondary victim? We didn't know. So we'd have to try and track those down. And some of the cases were so old that, people that we were dealing with are deceased.
Did you have any success with what you did on the cold case unit?
Oh, certainly, yeah. We had closed quite a few.
So when you say closed, meaning that you were able to find out basically the information you needed, the suspect or whatever the case was?
Yes, absolutely. All the way through to an arrest and prosecution and conviction, yes.
And with regards to the success you had on the cold case, did any of those cases not involve some type of technological thing like either a trace, DNA, or fingerprints?
I think I'd say there was none come to my mind that we didn't have something that was redone and reviewed and then came to a conclusion or pointed to a specific person that we were then able to go and interview. We had one where we flew to Toledo and we got a confession on a murder that happened here in Las Vegas because that person was already doing life without there for another murder that he had committed. I don't recall that we had any physical evidence in there that we needed. He confessed to it basically. What do I have to lose? I'm already doing life without.
So he basically was in custody ready for a murder in another state and basically
Columbus,
confessed and said, hey, I'm confessing this murder in Nevada.
Correct.
So it wasn't like you found,
We did. I mean, you look at some of these case files and they're definitely pointing towards a specific person, right? Every indication is that this is who you're dealing with.
Right.
And that it just you couldn't get it across the finish line, right? And like Jamie Sheldon, I brought up earlier, I know who did that murder, but it's whether or not there's enough to get across the finish line with that piece of evidence that's going to be where the district attorneys are willing to take that case to trial. And you're waiting for that one more thing, right? So it just stays there waiting for that one more piece of evidence to come in. And that happened with some of the cold cases where it's like, hey, we knew who this person was. I remember one specifically where we had a guy where we knew in the gang unit who we were looking for. And then I got to homicide and then looked up case files and saw that that person had never been charged. I'm like, how did he never get charged? We knew who it was. And we were able to then put enough together to arrest him and get a conviction.
And the arrest was because of either DNA or fingerprints or something along those lines?
On that one, no. We had video surveillance that existed at the time on a VHS tape from a 7-Eleven. You know, back when they were recording over them every 7 days, and so it was grainy, and you're like trying to get a clear enough picture. But we were able to, and we had physical evidence at the time that existed at the time connecting him to other cases, and we were able to get a conviction on that particular case with nothing new.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. So that was video surveillance with some other physical evidence that helped you solve that particular
Cartridge cases, yes.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of your work, the night of what happened here, now if I could just ask the clerk to switch over to Are you, does this help a little bit here about just zoning into what's, zooming into where this thing happened?
Right, that the red triangle or the red rectangle there is where the cartridge cases are located. Near the intersection, I think the closest piece of evidence was 60 feet away from Koval, and they were out in the travel lane, probably 14, 15 feet away from the south curb.
Okay, so my question to you very specific. You mentioned a little bit ago about what potentially would be a white Cadillac traveling north on Audrey or Aubrey. Can you just, you can step out, Dean, if you want, and just actually point with you can just point at the screen from over there so the jury can see.
You can do that. So this is Koval. This is now the west end, right? It used to be the Maxim. And this is the Audrey lane going north. And then down in here is Audrey Street that cuts over, it actually cuts south and it goes all the way over to the boulevard. The initial report was that we had this light colored Cadillac occupied by two VMAs that went north on Audrey. So they would have to, with that entourage that everybody had U-turned and gone this direction, they would have to have followed and then turn right to go up on Audrey. There's really no way for you to get from eastbound Flamingo at Koval to northbound Audrey without making a U-turn.
Okay, and just you could stay there for a second, Dean. The other part here is that I'm just pointing again with my pen, and that would be the area where you found and located the bullets, the cartridge cases.
Cartridge cases, yeah, they're in the eastbound lane. I think the number 3 travel lane, primarily, kind of straddling the lane there a little bit, right here before you get to Koval.
Now, if you can describe for us the street. So on that street right there, and I'm just pointing to the part of Flamingo that's, I guess, west of Koval, and then before or between Aubrey and Koval, this area here. Mm-hmm. Is there a concrete divider that's in that area?
There was not a concrete divider, no. And I think now it's like those yellow plastic cones that are every 2 feet. Now separating it when you come up, because on eastbound Flamingo, there's two left turn lanes to go north on Koval, 3 travel lanes, and then a right turn lane to go south on Koval.
So, for instance, if cars are going to make a U-turn and turn around and follow, like say, for instance, the black BMW, right? The other cars could just basically just make a left-hand turn and go right back. They don't have to go in procession around and keep going. Fair?
Yeah, well, now they would be hitting all those yellow cones. So I don't know. I don't think back then. I think you could probably just right there. I mean, it's a violation of the law.
It is.
Yes, you could certainly make a U-turn there.
Because my understanding is those cones that you're talking about would be actually on Koval to prevent people, I guess it's like to stop traffic from merging or having too much lanes or traffic in that area. Do you recall that?
I know all the yellow cones because I took a fellow marshal to the airport yesterday, and the lady in the box actually took me north on Koval to pass that intersection. So I was able to see all the yellow plastic. They're permanent cones that are there on the road right now, dividing the north or east and westbound traffic.
Right, but at the time, your recollection back in 1996, you don't know if there were cones up at that
I
point.
don't know, there wasn't.
Yeah.
I know there wasn't, and there wasn't a New Jersey wall, so I think, yeah, you could just make the turn.
Just
There
make
might have been a curb, there might have been a cement curb, but I don't see that in the photo, and I don't have an independent recollection of it.
Gotcha. So those cars are, if we're trying to envision the BMW getting shot at, and at some point it's making a U-turn, there's some discussion about rims on the vehicle being messed up because of,
Yeah, it's possible.
and then as it's going down, the other cars would have just either just turned around and made a immediate left to.
Possible. I know, because we never went to Harmon and the Boulevard and never saw the entourage, the other vehicles that had gone down there.
Your Honor, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Giacomo?
Briefly. I don't know if you retired on a Friday, but if you knew when you retired on Friday that on Monday you were going to be right back there as a cold case investigator, you wouldn't feel, or would you have felt, the need to finish that Friday before you got in the limousine?
I think I would have been okay to let it go. Yeah, that'd have been all right, and skip that part.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Has there been at least one case with you and I, in fact, where there was never an officer's report that was able to be completed?
Debbie Flores Narvaez.
And, is there any requirement that there be an officer's report created?
No, again, officer's report's not evidence, right? It's just kind of a guideline to go through the case file itself. There was, in the case that we're talking about, a case management form that went all the way through the investigation, so it really wasn't necessary to get to put it on a trial and get a successful conviction.
You mentioned as well that old case files. You've looked at, you said case files from before you were even born.
Yes.
You don't know if all of the reports that were ever generated were in that file or not in that file when you get the case, correct?
I could say that there were some case files that we pulled that they weren't even in 3-ring binders anymore. They were in accordion files, and there were definitely things missing, right, over time. The frustrating part of cold cases, going to pull evidence and seeing that it had long been destroyed, wasn't even available anymore, which shouldn't happen, but it sometimes does. And so, you're trying to piece together the case even without some pieces of evidence that you think is crucial.
So despite not having maybe everything that the original detectives have, you don't just give up. You still try and solve the crime.
Exactly. Well, you go redo it, right? I mean, if there's indication, like again, if you got a cocktail napkin with a name and a date of birth on there, but you don't know how that was involved, then if that person's still around, you go interview them. And, we ended up doing it in cold case. We ended up doing a bunch of traveling to where we would go do those interviews and sit down with people. And, they have, being a witness to or being involved or even connecting remotely to a violent incident like that or a murder, that's called a significant emotional event, right? You're going to remember very specific details. I'm sure in your own life you've had that, where something really significant hits and you can remember what you were wearing, you can remember the smell, you can remember where people are standing. So we're able to just go back and redo that interview and then put that into the case file, even though it was missing.
And you sort of said this, but in a lot of those case files, law enforcement knows what they believe to be the story. They just don't have the witnesses to present in a courtroom to establish the crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
No question. I would say, especially during my 2 years in investigation in the gang unit, also the 2 years on the RICO task force that we were involved in, we were dealing with gang-related crimes, and there were many cases where we had something happen with, we knew 50 people around, right? There were 50 people there, and you start talking to witnesses, and everybody has the same statement. I heard shots, I ran, and the police stopped me for no reason, right? So you don't get that level of cooperation because people are afraid, right? People maybe think because they think gangs might be involved, they don't want to say anything, they keep it to themselves, and they live with the fact that they didn't help, right? But then with cold case, we were able to come back to some of these older cases where now that, that young gang member that might have had 7% body fat back then and was, in his prime and was scary is now an older toothless, bulldog, that's resting in the shade. So people are not afraid to now come forward and say, yeah, I was there, I saw it, I know exactly who did it, and I can prove it. So we were able to solve some cases like that, which was good.
And you even mentioned a situation where you read through the file, you're like, I know who did it. You flew to Toledo, and he confessed.
Correct.
And that can happen in cold cases as well.
Yes, it does, thankfully.
Nothing further.
Mr. DiGiacomo, are you moving to admit Exhibits 129A through G?
I was going to have her mark them first before I offer.
Okay. Was there an objection to the admission of them?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. They will be admitted, and you may mark them. Jessica. And Mr. Stan, further questions? Okay.
Sorry, I thought I was done with you before.
No worries.
So with regards to the this incident, I want to make sure I'm clear here. You thought you had a suspect. What did you do? Send him a letter and say you need to confess to this crime? I mean, how did that work out with the thing that happened in Toledo?
Oh, in Toledo?
Yeah.
We had put together enough of the case to know, with every bit of confidence that it was him, even to the point where we were able to author an arrest warrant for him. And then we were in contact with the correctional facility that he was in custody and let them know that we wanted to come out. They actually approached him to let him know the detectives from Las Vegas want to come out and speak with you. And he agreed, right? I mean, he's sitting in custody for, serving life without for actually killing two people, a child and the child's father. And so, I think probably just for entertainment value alone, he agreed to talk to us, and we were able to come out there, sit down with him. They pulled him out of his cell, obviously, and away from the rest of the inmates. And we talked to him for a couple hours before lunch, and then we broke for lunch, and then after lunch, he told us he did it.
So you put together information here in Las Vegas. That was all corroborated, right? I mean, you had information, you had evidence that you were putting together, right?
Correct.
And all that evidence pointed towards this particular person.
Did it?
And then at some point you said, we just don't have enough. We would want to hear from this guy himself. And that's when you went out to Toledo to confront him on it?
I think that we would have been able to get a conviction without him telling us that he did it, but why not? I mean, if we went there and he said, "Pound sand," I'm not going to tell you. Like, you flew all the way out here, and now I'm not going to tell you that I did it. I mean, we still would have gone forward, but it certainly, bolsters the case to have him say, "Yes, I did it, and this is what I did before and after," which is what he was able to do.
Right. So in the case you were developing, you had corroborating evidence here in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And this was just the final, cherry on top to actually hear him say the words that, yeah, I did it.
Agreed.
Now, the corroborating evidence you had here, though, was your investigation. I would assume that it had some physical evidence, witnesses, that kind of thing to it.
It did.
Okay. And your testimony here right now is literally, you don't necessarily even need his confession. You could have just done it without it.
Yes.
Now, in addition to that, obviously, if you didn't have those things, you suspected somebody, but you don't have DNA, you don't have fingerprints, you don't have an eyewitness, you don't have surveillance video, you don't have anything at all that would tie that person to whatever the crime you believe has occurred, that would mean at that particular point you don't have it, right?
I would agree with that.
Now, in addition to that, your testimony here is, and I want to make sure I'm clear, you were a gang person before, and those field interview cards would be helpful if you were looking into a potential crime where someone is accused of the crime. Like, look at those field interview cards, right?
Field interview cards are very valuable. I worked bike patrol for the gang unit, and we filled out probably more FI cards, field interview cards, than a lot of the gang detectives did. That got me voluntold to test for gangs. And so, yeah, field interview cards are very, very valuable piece of information because you're contacting somebody in a non-threatening, non-arrest, non-custodial environment, and they're telling you, they're giving you information that you're able to document.
And if you could explain to the jury a little bit what a field interview card is.
So that, like, I was talking about that stop that we were on before the code red was called. So we were talking to some gang members that were gathered out in a neighborhood that we were familiar with gang members that we were familiar with. And so each time they're contacted, we would do a field interview card, little small, 3x5 card. This is a rights card, but just like this. It's white, and it has all of their pertinent information. Name, date of birth, all, height, weight, eye color, all those things, where you're contacting them. And there's a narrative portion on the back. And, most of the gang members in that type of environment would say, yeah, hey, I'm 18th Street. I'm like, whatever, for life. I'm 18th Street for life. So you document that. That's 18th Street for life. Because that's maintained in what you've heard, the gang file for a period of time, until that person says, no, I'm not, I don't affiliate with them, I'm not doing that anymore, I'm away from it. And then if that stays consistent for a certain amount of time, then that person's no longer in the gang file.
And is it every time that person comes in contact with law enforcement that a new card is generated because it's a physical thing?
A new card is, I always did. It documented my stop, it documented my activity, it documented our work, it documented, plus, it starts the time clock every time, right? So every time that person admits, every time that person's in the company of other known gang members, and then it starts that time clock so that they stay in the gang file until that time expires. So you want the clock to continue to start over.
Okay. And just one last question, and I hate hammering the heck out of this report stuff, but in terms of the example that was given you by the state, they said, well, if you retire and then you go into cold case, you can continue on with the investigation if it's a cold case, right?
I would, yeah, definitely.
How about the district attorney's office? You're an investigator at the district attorney's office. Does the district attorney's office have a cold case team?
We didn't have anybody assigned to us. At the time, because I left in January of 23, at the time we didn't have anybody that was catching our cold cases specifically, so I couldn't tell you one way or the other.
Right, so you are testifying that Metro has a cold case unit, to which if you're a detective with homicide and you want to take a case with you, you could have done that, right?
Certainly.
But with regards to taking your case as a homicide detective and now working for the district attorney's office, that's not how that typically works, right?
I wouldn't know how they function with it, because I know, we put a case file together and we submit that case, it gets approved by the DA's office, and that the district attorney may recognize certain things that need to be cleaned up or need to be followed up on that maybe wouldn't come back to the detective in homicide. Because keep in mind, if we're working a big case, we're still catching new cases. You don't catch a big case and then all of a sudden, time out, and I get to do this, work this case. You're still catching new cases. We worked one weekend in 2003 where we had 6 murders in one weekend. So you're up going into the weekend and up on rotation coming out of the weekend, because all the teams caught a case.
And so, just for the jury so they understand, Metro is the police department, they do investigations.
Correct.
Once you're done with the investigation, you develop a suspect, you then submit that request to the DA's office and the district attorney's office for prosecution.
Correct.
The district attorney's office, on the other hand, do not have investigators that initiate cases to be charged, right?
I don't know how the DA's investigators run their, I know I had contact with them multiple times over the years, because now we've involved the DA's office in what we've produced, because we seek the truth. DA's office seeks justice, right? So but I know there may be some incidental things that come up that an investigator will handle rather than taking it back to the homicide detective for follow-up.
In your experience throughout law enforcement, even up to currently, have you ever seen an investigator or the Clark County District Attorney's Office be the primary officer on a case?
No.
No further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further, Mr. DiGiacomo?
No.
Any questions from the jury? We do have at least once. Can I have the parties approach? Looks like we only have one. All right. Question from our jurors. There are 8 cones, but only 7 glass bottles in evidence. Was there another bullet not accounted for in the envelopes, or are there only 7 cases located there? Or were there only 7 cases located on the scene?
Good question. So the cone that was closest in the picture, if you remember, I said that was a bullet fragment. So underneath that cone was just a piece of a bullet, mostly just the lead. And so the bullet fragment plus the 7 cases.
Any follow-up questions based on that, Mr. DiGiacomo?
Detective, you opened the 7 casings, correct?
Yes.
All right. Showing you with the marked estates proposed exhibit number 130. These appear to be all the bullets and fragments that were collected by Dan Ford.
That's correct. They were also listed on the evidence inventory that I've seen a copy of. I recognize the handwriting and initial and P number for Dan Ford.
As once again, there's also a blue stripe on here. I'm not going to open this one. There's also a blue stripe on here indicating that they were forensically tested as well.
Yes.
Judge, I'll move to admit 130.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Any other questions that you have?
No.
Mr. Stampt, questions on this question, essentially?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, perfect. All right, you are free to go.